The Emperor of Mankind is a really controversial character in the story of 40k. Is he a tyrant who wants to elevate himself to godhood at the expense of everybody else? Or is he the saviour of humanity who has put himself in pain for the last 10,000 years to prevent this planet from falling into the abyss? This is something that the writers at Black Library have put into the setting really well, because we get to decide which opinions and versions of the Emperor we like and are going to keep in our narrative, and which do we think are lies and just deceits from chaos or from Imperial madmen. And so this kind of comes as like a warning ahead of this video, because I'm going to cover one person's opinion of the Emperor, and it might not be true. You could completely discount everything that's in this. However, this is somebody who was incredibly close to the Emperor, maybe the closest to him save Malgador the Sigillite. So this has certainly got some revelations in it that we've never had before, and is super interesting. In Saturnine, John Grammaticus shows up. Now, John Grammaticus used to be a perpetual, and a perpetual is somebody in the 40k setting who cannot die. They are somebody that can recover from basically any wound and will live forever, and they are described as being the next stage in human evolution. Now, John Grammaticus arrives on Terra to meet Erda, who is still a perpetual, one of the few that are left. So Erda tells us that the Emperor is just a perpetual. Now, I say just perpetual like that's not a big deal. It would obviously be great to be an immortal superhuman, but compared to the Emperor's original story, it's kind of a demotion. Originally, the Emperor was said to be the result of a massive ritual and self-sacrifice, but actually now we've discovered that he was just a genetic anomaly. She does describe him, however, as being the most powerful of all of the perpetuals, and even though there was quite a few perpetuals, all of them put together wouldn't amount to the power of the Emperor. And his power has actually grown since then due to whatever happened through the gate at Moloch, where he supposedly deceived the Chaos Gods and used them to help create the Primarchs. Thankfully, there were no repercussions to this. And the reason his power is interesting is because it's said the more powerful the Emperor gets, the less human he becomes. So, for example, by the time Rabute Guilliman meets up with him in 40k after Gathering Storm, his reaction is not very heartwarming, as you'd expect when a son finally sees their father after a really long time. But he kind of finally understands that the Primarchs are all just tools to the Emperor. But apparently back in the day, the Emperor was quite human, and he was funny and he was kind, and so maybe there's a bit of that still in him. Now, the Emperor wasn't alone in his quest to guide humanity to a brighter future. Apparently this was shared by many of the Perpetuals, who would try and guide humanity from the shadows or step forward at key times. Some of them would try and be leaders. They were all trying to get humanity to the next stage of evolution, to essentially become perpetuals. And so the Emperor was just the best at this. And so the perpetuals all flock to him, as everybody does in 40k. Even the Primarchs struggle to be in the presence of the Emperor without falling to their knees and wanting to, praise him. And so the Emperor created this massive boy band of non-dying perpetuals for a while, and they loved him until they didn't. Because resentment started to grow both towards and from the Emperor. Obviously the Perpetuals were jealous of the power that the Emperor was amassing, but also the Emperor was annoyed at the fact that none of the other Perpetuals could see his vision like he could. They couldn't keep up with his incredibly fast moving brain, until eventually it was only Erda and the Sigillite left. But even Erda was getting a bit annoyed at how the Emperor was operating, because according to her, he was taking big risks. Now, we're not sure what they were, but he was essentially trying to advance humanity to the perpetual stage unnecessarily. Now, fun point of lore here, and something that potentially Erda didn't even know, which is that the Emperor probably did fast track his plans to create the Primarchs and the Astartes in the Crusade, because he had foresight, and he could see that there was an Orc brewing that was larger than anything the galaxy had seen at that point, and if it got large enough, it would roll over the whole galaxy. And so he had this time in his head around the year 30,000 where he knew the crusade had to be on its way, or else the orcs were just going to win. But I digress. And so the Emperor started working on the Primarch project with his two chief scientists, who were Erda and Amar Astarte, #women in STEM. Now, as we know, Vulcan was the only Primarch who was actually a perpetual. However, the Primarchs were a replacement for the perpetuals that wouldn't work with the Emperor, according to Erda. And that is why he makes them to be eternally loyal to him for most of the time. Now, one thing we find out from Erda, which is a huge revelation, is that, as we know, the Primarchs are made from the genetic material of the Emperor, but they are also made from hers, which means the Primarchs have a mother. And there is a big difference between their two chosen parenting styles. Erda outright loves her children, even the ones that are at this point in the Horus Heresy a bit odd, but we're never sure whether the Emperor actually loves or even likes his children. So there is some evidence to suggest that he does. In Valdor, Malcador says that the Emperor has already started calling them his sons before he's even found them, and that's really interesting. But in Master of Mankind, he's really cold when he talks about the Primarchs, and when Angron is about to undergo surgery from Arkan Land, he actually refers to him as the 12th, which isn't exactly how you'd think a worried father should behave in the hospital. Now, the Emperor, being the control freak that he is, didn't allow Erda to have any influence over the Primarchs when they were young, and Erda started to realise exactly the purpose that the Emperor had for the Primarchs, which was to be weapons of war, and ultimately he would throw them aside when he was done. And so, wanting to spare her children what is quite a horrific fate, she scattered the Primarchs. And this is why at the beginning I talked about points of view, because there have been many versions already of what happened to the Primarchs. So were they scattered by the powers of chaos, who were taking a blow at their most terrible foe and the only being who would ever be a true threat to them? Was it Horus Lupercal who scattered the Primarchs when he was shown visions when he was dead for that time? Or was it Argal Tau who scattered the Primarchs when... Nah, he didn't. He just didn't. It's up to you to believe any one of these versions of that story that you'd like, and that's a really great thing about the Warhammer storyline. But it is certainly interesting to think about how she would have done it. Did she make a pact with Chaos to deliver the Primarchs? Did she just open a portal and just start throwing in babies? We have no idea. And Erda's decision here really interests me. I get her stance. I get that you think the Emperor is a tyrant and you want to spare your children. But what's weird is that she doesn't really show any guilt for what happened to them. Like, she doesn't look at Conrad Kurz and go, oh, my bad guys, my bad. Was she hoping to kill the Primarchs? A terrible fate, but one that in the long run may have actually been kinder to them. Or was she just trying to delay the Emperor's plans by however much she could? Now, what's fascinating to me is that the Emperor then doesn't go and kill her, even though he is somewhat peeved. Now, this could be because the damage is done and so he doesn't see any point, but it could also be because there's actually quite a big connection between the two. They are, after all, mother and father. Now, we can assume that the Emperor of Mankind hasn't always been called the Emperor of Mankind because it is not actually in the baby name book. He apparently changes his name a lot throughout history. I guess it's kind of hard to control humanity from the shadows when you call yourself the Emperor. But Erda says there's one name that he went with the most, or that she knew him as most often, which is Neoth, which sounds a bit like Neo. Now, thankfully for GW's copyright team, there's not a lot of similarities between the two. For example, they don't both have immense power, are set to save humanity, or both rise up after a rebellion by artificial intelligence. But seriously, I think this is really cool, and it's one of many things in the Siege of Terra series and the Horus Heresy more widely which has been a bit of a curveball from the writers, and this is something that they definitely set out to do, because it's really hard to tell a story if everybody knows the ending, and so they've thrown in these random bits of information that we either didn't know or never thought about before to keep us engaged, and it's worked really well. And it also works because if you're somebody that just really likes the old lore of 40k and 30k, you can still use that. Everything and anything is and isn't canon at any point in the story. It's really your story. I'm really interested to see what everybody else thinks about Erda. Like, how powerful do we think she is? Like, we've seen Malcador hold back pre-chaosy Horus with relative ease. Could she do the same? Could she stand up to any of the Primarchs? And what do you guys think is going to happen to her and the rest of the Perpetuals? There's not really many left by the time we get to 40k, and so are they going to be wiped out? Are they going to die? What's Erda going to do by the time the Horus Heresy series is over? Is she going to have met any of the Primarchs? Potentially she'll meet Sanguinius and he'll take the secret of him having a mother to his grave. I'm really interested to see what the writers do with this character now. It's a huge, huge curveball for me. I, for one, am just really excited for where they take this storyline. I think a lot of what they've put in here makes a lot of sense to me, and so I can't wait to see where it all ends up. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all next time. Happy hobbying.